Welcome to part 2. This week Ian has brought his 1968 BSA Starfire down to my workshop for a little bit of fettling. We've already had a look at the clutch, which was giving some problems, but now his bike is actually starting, it still isn't running properly. Ian, you've already put a new carburettor on this bike, I believe?
Yes, that's right. This is the old one that I actually took off. I took it off because the first time I started the bike, it started on full throttle and just wouldn't idle at all. I had to switch it off quickly to stop it bouncing down the drive.
Sounds quite dramatic, okay. So you've actually put a brand new carb already on the bike.
That's
This
right.
is the old one.
That's right.
Right. So one or two things that we might have to adjust on there. First of all, the way the carburettor works, when you twist the throttle, what it actually does is opens that throttle slide, and that moves up and down like that inside the carburettor body. And that's what controls how the engine actually revs. Now on this one, if I push it up to the top, it actually sticks at the top. There, it goes to the top, and it won't go any further, it actually jams in place. And that was what obviously was causing your over-revving problem. Now we've sorted that out with a new carburettor, but it still isn't idling properly. There's two different adjustments that you can make on this with those two screws there. One of them, that actually controls the mixture of air to petrol as it's going into the engine. That second screw there controls the idle speed.
Right.
And what we need to do now is with the bike running, is play around with the adjustments on those two screws until it runs evenly, which hopefully we'll be able to do. So if I can pass that to you, I've got firing the bike up and we need to do with this with the engine running. So hopefully she'll start again for us. Right, what I'm going to do now, Ian, can you just hold the throttle so it doesn't stall? What I'm going to do is turn one of those screws up, which will give us an idle. So put the screwdriver on there. Right, you can let go of that now. There we go, and the bike's now running on its own carburettor setting. That sounds a bit better.
It does.
Now what I'm going to do, I've turned the idle screw up so the bike's ticking over. I'm now going to set the mixture on this screw here. If I turn the screw one way or the other, the engine will run happier and faster. Let's give it a blip. Sounds pretty good.
That sounds much better.
That sounds lovely to me. Do you want to take her out for a bit of a test ride, Ian, and see what
I think it's about time.
Go? Okay, smash it. Let's find your crash helmet.
Okay.
It's quite important now for Ian to be test riding the bike because while we've made some adjustments to it, we don't yet know if there are any other faults with the machine. Obviously the bike's now running, but it will need some test mileage put on it to make sure that everything is right, particularly things like carburettor settings and the ignition timing. After a shakedown ride like this, there will be one or two adjustments that need making to bed in. This bike hasn't done a lot of mileage over the past few years, and this is something of a maiden flight. It'll be important to make sure that the valve clearances are okay and that the spark plug's firing properly. If you're used to riding a modern bike, then riding a classic is going to be quite a different experience. These bikes require quite a lot of input, not only in the riding but also the maintenance and the way that you have to look after them. How are you doing, Ian? How was it?
That was fantastic, Rod. Absolutely fantastic.
Excellent. Is it running better than it was before?
Much better, much better.
What's she like to ride?
Oh, she's great. She's great. I couldn't have asked for more from her. I was given her age. I mean, the handling compared to a modern bike, I was really surprised how quickly it actually turns into the corners.
Right. There might be one or two tweaks we can still do to make the bike run just as good as she possibly can do.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do is get her back into the workshop now and let's just see if we can add a few minor tuning details just to make things even better. Is that okay?
Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
Let's get her into the workshop then.
Okay.
Now Ian's bike is now running pretty well, but there's still one or two health checks I'd like to do before I pronounce it fully fit. First thing I'd like to do, Ian, is have a look at the points and the ignition timing on your bike. And in order to do that, the first thing to do is to take this cover off here. First thing I do notice is a little trace of oil in the bottom. Now there is actually an oil seal in the back of this casing that runs on the end of this shaft here. So at some point it might be worth taking that cover off and fitting a new oil seal just to stop that. It's not a major problem at the moment, so I wouldn't lose too much sleep over it, but it's well to notice that it's there. Now what you've got over here, these are the contact breaker points, and this is actually a mechanical switch that controls when the spark plug fires. If you're used to modern Japanese bikes, of course, you don't have contact breakers anymore. It's all done by sophisticated electronics these days. But this is how it used to be done. Now, the way it works, when the engine's running, this bit here spins around. This is actually a points cam. And as it spins around, it makes the points open and close like that. and every time the point's open, it fires the spark plug. Now what I propose to do is check just how far those points are opening.
Okay.
And in order to do that, we need some means of turning the engine over. Now again, on a more sophisticated bike, there'd be various places you could put a spanner to do it. But the easiest way to do it on a British Classic, no, it's a Japanese then, is spark plug out, put the bike into top gear. So if I turn the back wheel and operate the gear lever like that, I should be able to get the bike into top gear. What I can do now is use a back wheel to turn the engine over. So if I turn the back wheel and you watch that, you should see that cam going around. And what I'm looking for, there's a line there on the points cam.
Yep.
That line indicates the highest point of lift. So I'm going to line that up to the heel on the points, and that'll give us the widest gap, and that's where we measure it.
Okay.
Is that making sense?
It is.
Great stuff. So if I turn this wheel over now, you can see it's going the other way. It's wobbling about a bit. But we're nearly there, and there's a line.
That's it. Yeah.
In line with the heel. And that's always a position you need to have the engine in to check the points gap. To check the gap, you'll need something like this. This is a set of feeler gauges. Have you used these before? I
have, yes.
Great, so you know what they are. Basically, each blade on there has a different thickness, and there's a number stamped on the gauge to tell you how thick it is. That's 15, 15th thou. You can buy these in metric sizes as well. Don't be confused. If you work in a British bike, I always use imperial gauges. Do you want to just try that gauge in that gap and see how it feels? And if the gap's right, it should just slide in and drag clear.
Yeah, there's a lot of space there.
Not too big?
Yeah, far too big.
Can I just check that? I think you're right, it actually looks too big from here. Yeah, could drive a bus through that one. Right. It was quite important to me to show you the points gap and how to adjust them, because if the points gap isn't correct, the ignition timing also isn't right. And I wanted to make sure this bike had a clean bill of health. So next I had to show him how to adjust them. Now, we're starting to work with tiny screws inside a tiny housing here, but the one we need to change is that one. That screw actually locks the points against the back plate. So if I slack that screw off, and now I'm going to use this little screwdriver to move the points housing, and if I've got this right, let's pull it out of the way. What I should be able to do now is move the points gap. Did you see that change?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Now the points have been adjusted, the ignition timing should be spot on, but it's still quite important to make sure that the spark plug is of the correct grade and correctly adjusted.
So Rod, we've managed to get the bike running. Is there anything else I could do to keep it running reliably?
There's lots of things that you can do, Ian. You can upgrade your bike with various bits of modern technology if you want to do, without necessarily spoiling the characteristics of the bike. One thing I have got here that might interest you is an electronic ignition kit. This gadget actually replaces the points that we've just been looking at on the bike. You've got a device here which comprises of two little electromagnets and a backing plate, and that goes in instead of the contact breakers, and once it's in and set, it can be left in there forever, and it never ever needs adjusting, so it gives you more reliable ignition and something that you don't need to service.
I've seen these before. There's a lot of people would say that it doesn't really fit on a classic bike though.
I think to some degree that's up to you. Once something like this is fitted on the bike, it really isn't visible. So it won't spoil the looks of the bike, it'll make it run a bit more reliably. And while you're correct that it's not quite fully authentic, I think, you know, my own preference would be to go for it, but the choice is yours. And the last job today on Ian's BSA is to make sure that the valve clearances are set correctly, because if they aren't right, the engine will never run properly. Have you ever set valve clearances on an engine like this before?
No, it's another first for me, Rod.
Right, easy enough to do. The first thing I'm going to do is take this cover off here. Again, I'm using a metric spanner for this, but it's the best fit I've got for what should be an imperial size. So please excuse that. Some people still refer to this as doing the tappets, by the way, because we haven't had tappets since side valve engines back in the 30s and 40s. The name kind of stuck. Now what I'm going to do is turn the engine over again until it's in the right place to check the clearances. So I still have the bike in gear, no spark plug, and I'm going to use a back wheel to turn it over.
Okay.
But what I want to do now is gauge when the piston's at the top of its stroke. Now you can buy special tools for this, but we're going to use a crude but effective way today, and that's to use a screwdriver down the spark plug hole. It may look a bit crude, but as long as you're careful, it's quite effective. So if I turn the engine over, I should be able to find exactly when that comes to the very top of its stroke. It's a bit of a delicate juggling act, but we're just about there Now then, if you want to pick up that feeler gauge, I've got the right size gauge. Just see if that'll fit underneath the rocker arm there. And that's how much clearance we should have on there.
Yeah, that fits. That's fine.
That going okay?
Yeah.
Right, if they're too tight or if you're too slack, you can adjust them. There are adjusters at the other side of the engine. Let's pop that cap back on. And then the absolute last job to finish off, of course, we just bob the spark plug back in and you're ready to ride this bike back to Scotland tonight. Well, it's been great fun meeting Ian and I've really enjoyed working on his bike. I don't usually do that much work with British bikes these days. I tend to favour more modern Japanese classic bikes, but I do have a soft spot for these old British bikes because it's what I cut my teeth on. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show and do come back next week and see what else is coming into my workshop. And if you'd like me to help you with your bike, check out the Men & Motors website. Bye for now.